Welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. I think it's fair to say that many photographers, particularly amateur photographers, don't have a great need to lay out multiple images on a page, maybe for a preparation for a large print. Now, I think it's also fair to say that most photographers are going to need to present multi-images on a page at some stage. But of course, if we don't do it very often, then we haven't got the experience when we need it. Now, this is a technique that's got a great deal easier over time as Photoshop continues to improve. We've had guides that help the layout of images for quite a while now, but alongside those we also have smart guides. Now, smart guides are turned on by default, but you won't see them until you start working in layers, but they are powerful and they save a lot of time. In a previous video we created a triptych, and to do that we used clipping groups, and we made the triptych from 3 black shapes. I'm going to use a similar method here, but I'm going to put a number of old images shot in the First World War from a French point of view, which a friend of mine asked me to scan. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've opened up Adobe's Bridge and navigated to a folder of images that I can select from. Now, I only want 12 of these images, and it doesn't really matter for our demonstration here which 12 that I select, but it's always nice to have more than 12 from which you need to select those 12. What I'm going to do is to lay out a piece of artwork which is 4 images along the top, 3 down, so we're going to present 12 of these images. If you look at the pixel value of most of these images, they're going to be around about 3.4, 3.3 on the long side. I'm looking around as I speak for the smallest one there. It doesn't matter too much if we have to increase the size of just 1 or 2 very slightly. It's not going to make a massive difference to the quality. I think I'll start with this image size because this one is quite small compared to some, but as you can see it's only 30 odd pixels shorter on the length. They're all slightly different because they've all been individually scanned. Now, the way I'm going to work here is very similar to what we did with the triptych, but generally speaking I'm going to make my canvas fit my images. Now, that means I'm likely to end up with a huge file, but it's not a problem. Always better to have a large image that you could print 6 or 7 feet across if you wanted to. Very easy to then scale that down to any size print you need. Now, we can see the image that we're going to base our artwork on is around 3391 by 2646. So let's open up Photoshop, create a new canvas at that size. To do that, I'm going to go to File, New. Over on the right hand side here in the width I want my 3391, and in the height 2646, and the color is not important, black is fine, so let's create it. What I'm going to do straight away though is go to my layers, and I'm going to remove the lock because I want to add canvas and I want my canvas to be transparent. So now we can go directly to our image canvas size, top left of the screen, and when we think about what we've got to do here, I'm going to change this to inches. When you think about what we're doing here, I'm going to put 4 images across the top. So I need at least 4 times 11 inches, so that's 4 11s are 44. I'm going to need a gap between them and a border, so I think I'm going to need about, I'm going to make it 60 because I can always crop back a little later if I've got too much canvas, or I can add some if I've underestimated. So let's just say 60 inches on the width. With regard to height, we've got almost 9 inches, and I'm going to go 3 high. So 3 9s are 27. 27, oh, I'm guessing wildly here. Let's say 40. When I click OK, an enormous amount of canvas is going to be created, so I'll hit Ctrl+0 to fit my artwork back on screen. Now we're going to see those smart guides spring into action, because as I pick up that piece of artwork, you can see those pink lines are helping me to position it in the center, both horizontally and also vertically. But in actual fact, I want this up at the top, so I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to move it across there somewhere, and when it snaps into place, sometimes if you pick up your artwork from the top left or top right, you'll find it'll snap nicely into place. Now the first one is not that important, but here's a nice little trick. We need to make eventually 11 other copies of this, so we're going to have 11 layers, but we can maybe tidy that up a little bit too. What I'm going to do with my Move tool selected is hold my Alt key and click and drag. There's the second of my pieces of artwork. Now remember, I'm going to want 4 across the top. Now that was pretty quick, because not only could I drag it into place, but it's also created the layer for me. Let's do it again for another one, and I'll drag that to the left, and now you can see the smart guides working perfectly. Look at that. They're putting a 37mm gap between each of those images. We may want to change that in a moment. Doesn't matter, it only takes seconds to do. Now I've got my 3 images in the center, but of course I need a bit more space either left or right, so what I could do here is just select all 3 of those layers by holding the Control key. Then I can move all of them a little bit to the right just for a moment, and then click just to release them. I'll select another one, hold that Alt key once again, and I'll drag that out to create the 4 images along the top. Now we need to just stop for a second, sit back and decide if we've got enough gap between each of those 4 squares. If you look up at the top left of the screen, you'll notice that I've just saved my file here as a Photoshop file. I've just called it The French at War. Now supposing I wanted to add a little more space between each of those, well, all I've got to do then is use the Control key, because if I use the Control key and I click any one of these squares, if you look over on the right hand side, you can see as I do so, that layer will be automatically selected. Very convenient. Then I can release the key, so I could move things around. So if I wanted to select the one on the right and move it around, because I want to separate them just a little more, not much, but let me just click to the one on the right. You can see the little pink smart guide appears. I'll click to select it. There it is selected on the right hand side in the bottom of the layered stack, and I just want to move it out just a little bit, just to give myself a little more space. Now I'm going to select the one on the left using the same procedure, and I'll just drag these in exactly the same way. There I've got my perfect layout. Now I've got a number of choices here, so what I'm about to do is not essential, but let's do it to make life just a little easier. I'm going to amalgamate all of these together, because we're going to use a procedure called paste into. So selecting all of those layers, if I right click to the right of them, I can select merge. Now as you can see, it does merge the layers, but we don't lose the transparent background. And now I could just move this into place in the center of my artwork. If I want a little space at the top, I can make sure I've got that right, but I'm pretty certain we're going to want to crop back a little bit, but the position is not vital at the moment. Now just for the moment, let's stop and recap with those 2 tools that I've just used. With the Move tool selected from the top of the toolbox on the left, if I've got a series of layers, I can just tap the Control key and click any one of these shapes, and the particular layer that the shape is sitting on will be selected. Now at the moment we have amalgamated them all together. The other option was holding the Alt key, and I could click and drag and make a copy of one of those shapes. Well, now I've got them amalgamated all 4 together. If I do that here, Alt, there's the cursor change, click and drag, There's my second batch of images. I'm going to position them around about there. Then I can do the same again, Alt, click and drag. There I've got my layout made in just a couple of minutes. All we've got to do now is decide if the canvas is the right size for us. Now, I think I got just a little bit lucky with those sizes. I didn't pre-measure them, it was just a guess, but it doesn't matter even if we get it wrong. Because what we can do is select the three layers on the right, and we can do what we did a few moments ago, right click and choose to merge them. Now I can pick them all up as a whole, and I can move them down into the center of my artwork, and I can decide if the canvas is big enough or I need to add some. Doesn't matter either way. If it's too big, we can crop away what we don't want. If it's too small, we just go back to image and canvas size, and we can add a few inches top, bottom, left or right. As it happens, that doesn't look too bad, so I'll hit Ctrl S to save over the top of my previously saved file, so I've got my artwork nicely saved. Now we can't use clipping groups easily here because we're going to put individual images into those individual shapes. We just need to do it in a slightly different way. But remember, if I demonstrate one, the rest are going to be identical. Now as you can see, we're back into Photoshop's bridge, so what I need to do is to select the 12 images that I want. I could open them all up together if I wanted to, or I could take them in one at a time. Let me show you one at a time to start with. Let's pick up the one that I first identified for the size, because we know our artwork is going to fit nicely here. But with the paste into technique I'm about to show, it doesn't really matter because it's going to work very similar to the clipping groups. So let's open this image up into Photoshop. What I'm going to do here is work in a slightly different way to clipping groups. I'm going to hit Ctrl A, which is the shortcut keys to select all. There you can see the marching ants around the outer edge of that car. I'm going to hit Ctrl C, which is the universal shortcut key for copy what is inside that selection. You'll find the same option if you go to the edit menu. There's your copy and a reminder of the shortcut, and what we're going to do in a moment is paste this into our artwork, but we're going to paste into. So I actually don't need this on screen now. It doesn't matter if I leave it there, but I could, now I've copied it to the clipboard, close it down. Once I'm back to my artwork, I need to decide where that car is going to be. The car is facing right to left, so if I pick up my magic wand tool, I'm going to select the shape up at the top right. If we then go back to our edit menu and choose paste special, we're going to choose paste into. There is a shortcut, but it's 4 keys. Look, Alt, Shift, Control, V. But there's the picture nicely placed inside. If I pick up the move tool, and you'll see the picture up here, you can see that I can move it around, but you can see I don't have a great deal of movement open to me here because the artwork was made based on this particular image, but that wasn't the object of the exercise. So all we would need to do is exactly the same for each one. Let's do one more. So there's the image opened up on screen. We can see we've got a little border on the left hand side, so we may have to pay attention to make sure that doesn't show. But once again, shortcut keys for select all is Control A. If you forget the shortcut keys, remember what you're doing. You're making a selection. So if you go up to the top of the screen and choose select, there's the option right at the top. Select all, Control A. So now we need to hit Control C to copy what's within that selection to the clipboard, and we can close this down. This car is also facing in, so I'll pick up my magic wand. I'll select the shape over on the right hand side. Now I've made a mistake there. And it wasn't a deliberate mistake because I'd forgotten that I need to reselect my artwork before I make my selection. So let's hit Control D to remove that selection, and then I can select the right square or the right oblong. Then we need to go up to our edit, paste special, paste into. Let's zoom in. Well, it looks like the size of my artwork is working in my favour. There's no little edge being seen there. So all I've got to do here is to repeat what I've just done. Now I suppose we could speed up the process just a little bit by opening all of the images up in one go. But sometimes that can be counterproductive because we get a little bit confused at times. One or two at a time probably is the best bet. Now, as you can see here, I brought you back into Bridge briefly because as I've been selecting the images, I've also given them a flag so I don't get confused about which ones I've used and which ones I haven't. So for example, I want to use this one next, and I'm holding the Control key to click this one, and I'm going to hit Control and the number 8 key, which will automatically add that green flag. Then I can open both of these up into Photoshop and go through the same process to paste into my artwork. Now once I've dropped all of my images into my artwork using the paste into, the problems I may see is when I've left with the images at the top left and the one below, where we created the artwork at a certain size and this image happened to be scanned just a fraction smaller. So with that move tool selected, if we hold the Control key and click the top left, you'll see that the layer that holds this picture has been selected. It's the third one down from the top on the right hand side. Now if I bring up my free transform, which is in the edit menu, but Control T, all I've got to do here is make my image just marginally bigger. Not a lot, and it's hardly going to affect the quality at this size, and hit the Enter key and we've got it sorted. With the Move tool still selected, Control, click the one beneath, Control T, make it very slightly bigger. I'll drag this one out and hit the Enter key. Now I've still left that little slither down the bottom. Well, use your down arrows on the keyboard to just nudge it down into place. If you go too far, of course, you'll reveal the black shape underneath. Nudging back up, there's my artwork complete. Looks rather complicated, but when we think about it, it's quite straightforward really. Now I've just hit Control S to save what I've created so far, because I'm going to suggest that we select all of these layers from the one at the top, hold the Shift key and select the bottom one, and we'll select all of those in between. Then if we right click to the right of the thumbnail, we can choose Merge Layers. Now we've got all of our artwork into one. But before I go any further, I would be saving this using a slightly different name because I don't want to overwrite my layered file. So I may put -edit there, edit 1 perhaps. Now we can think about the remainder of the presentation, the frame around the outer edge. Just before I do that, let me just go up to the image size. And if we look at the size of the artwork we have, we can see that we can in fact print this image 5 foot across at 300 pixels per inch. In fact, we could probably get it much bigger than that if we really wanted to. So we've got lots of scope here. What we could do, I suppose, is to create that matte effect, and we can do that pretty easily. Let's go and pick up our magic wand, select the background, which Photoshop is going to select pretty easy, even though it's taken just a few seconds to do it. Let me do that again. There it is, all selected. That's because we've got a big piece of artwork on screen here. I'm going to go to the bottom right of my layers and create a new blank layer, and then I'm going to touch the D key. Look over at the bottom of the toolbox. I've got 2 shades of white in the bottom there, so if I touch the D key, it takes it back to black and white. So this layer 2 that I've just created, I'm going to make that a shadow. So let's flood the selection with black. So Alt backspace will do that. Let's go back down to create another new blank layer over the top. This one I'm going to choose a neutral color. I'm going to pick up my foreground color here. I want something neutral here, but maybe with a tiny little warm tone just to match some of the images, because they seem to have a little bit of a warm tone, but this is changeable, as you probably know. And once again, Alt backspace, and there we have that flooded. Control D will remove our selection. Now that's a little bit too warm for me, so I'm going to bring up my hue and saturation with Control U. Just take a little bit of that colour off, just a tiny amount. I'm also going to zoom in a little bit because I'm going to put a bit of noise in there too. So I'm going to go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, Gaussian Monochrome Noise. You can see I can get up to about... Actually, we can get quite high before we start to see it. I think that's going to look somewhere around about 20 with this size artwork. Even that's not too bad. Maybe that's a bit high for me. I'll go back to 15, click OK, then Control 0 to fit the image back on screen. And now we can think about putting a fine line around the edge of these and blurring the shadow layer here to create the drop mount effect. So let's select the shadow layer first and add Gaussian blur. Now perhaps I should increase the size of the artwork just a little bit so we can see a bit more clearly before we do that. Then up to the filters menu, blur, Gaussian blur. The amount I've got here is about, let's say, 50. Now that doesn't look too bad. Maybe it's a bit heavy. Let's try the slider and take it down a little bit. That's too low. That's looking a little bit better, somewhere about 29, 30. That looks okay. And remember, in one of the other videos I was explaining that with some images, if you want to increase the impact of your shadow, make a copy of the layer that you've used to create the shadow. So if we take a look at the car in the snow for a moment and I hit Control J to copy our layer, there you can see now the indentation is a little greater. Personal choice as always as to whether we want to stay with that or not. Let's hit Control 0 and select the top layer to add those fine lines. Now to do that, or before I do that, I think it may be a good idea if I do what I did before as well. Just zoom in a little bit so we can see it a little more clearly. Always a good idea, I think, with high resolution artwork like this. But once we've got that top layer selected, I'm going to go down to my effects and I'll select stroke directly. So we've got the stroke ticked and selected, so the parameters on the right are all opened up to us. Let me change the color. I'm going to put white round there at least to start with. And there we can see that nice thin line around the edge. I've got the outside selected here. So that's looking pretty good. Let's make sure that we can't see this over on the top of our artwork. Let me cancel that for a moment, and perhaps what I should have done is brought that down to about there. And you'll see why when I go back in. I just wanted to make sure that when we select the color that we're not introducing a stroke line around the outer edge at the top as well, because if we had the inside selected, then of course we would do. So choose the outside and choose the size that you want. 10, that looks a little bit heavy to me. Let's come down 9, 8, 7. These are the sorts of things which you need to leave overnight. You create something like this, save it, come back in the cold light of tomorrow and see if you're still happy with what you've done. But it doesn't look too bad, and we could get a fantastic print from this, almost as big as we need it. Now with the spinning round of the screen, I've changed the edge line to black and I've greatly increased its thickness. In practice, I've found that from a visual point of view, I seem to be able to accept a much thicker dark line than a white line, and I think the reasons are pretty obvious. White draws our eye a lot more. I actually quite like the black line here. I think it looks a little bit better. So I'm going to call my artwork finished. Now if we were going to print this and have it on the wall of our home, I suppose one last thing we could do, we could put a little title down the bottom. Sometimes there's a need to do that when we see images of this nature. It may say something like the French at war, or World War I from the French perspective. Whatever you choose, make sure it's delicate. You don't want it to draw attention from the images you've presented. And remember, when you're presenting images, do try to have images pointing into the screen and not out. And I think I've done that down the right hand side and the left hand side, with a bit of a mixed batch in the middle. Now when you think about what we've done here, laying out 12 images in the way we have, my whole video looks like being about 30 minutes in length, but of course it's bound to be a lot longer than it's actually going to take us to create the artwork, because we're stopping, talking and demonstrating what we're doing as we do it. But if we sat down to do this and we were reasonably fluent with the techniques, 15 minutes top whack to produce a top quality piece of artwork ready for printing. But of course, once we've got it saved as a Photoshop file with all of the images separate, so I can change the position of the images should I feel the need. I've also got this one saved, but of course before we sent this to the printers to have this large print made, we would go to the top of the layers and we would flatten it to finally finish. Photoshop just making a little bit of a job of it, but then again, the artwork is fairly large. Now to bring this video to a close, and just for interest, I have opened up the image size window. Look at the size of the artwork we've produced. Even in its flattened form, it's 618 megabyte. But it is a large file. Now I seem to remember sometime around 25 years ago, when I was first introduced to Photoshop, that my images would fit on a 1.4 megabyte floppy disk. How times have changed. Photoshop is a fantastic program, but it does take a bit of learning. If you'd like to get into Photoshop, but in a much more measured way, the way where you're going to retain most of the information that you receive, come along to my website at the top of the screen there and look for Photoshop for Photographers. There you have a complete course from beginner to advanced. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, can I encourage you to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you're informed whenever I put up new content. Thanks for watching.